Hello folks.
Hello.
My name is Natalie.
I'm Daniel.
And today we're going to be showing you how to make the Grandbaby Carrot Cakes recipe. I'm going to be showing you how to make a triple layer cake as well as cupcakes. Let's get to it. So to start out, we are going to be greasing and flouring 3 cake pans as well as preparing our... So we're going to be greasing and flouring 3 cake pans. So I melted some butter. So you're going to smear it with, obviously, I've cleaned my hands. Make sure you get all the way up onto the sides. Then you're going to take a little handful of flour, sprinkle it in, pat it around, and swirl. Then I already did these 2, but normally I would just dump the flour into the next pan to save flour. I'm just going to dump it into the sink. Alright, so we've got our 3 cake pans. We're going to set those aside. So for the cupcake pans, I didn't have liners that weren't Christmas themed. So I just buttered the inside of the pan with a lot of butter. We're going to see if it works. Then I've got these cupcake liners, these little baby ones for my baby cupcakes. I'm going to quick give them a spray with Pam spray. So we just make it like this, so they don't stick. Alright, so our pans are all prepared. We're going to set all these aside and start with the recipe. So we're going to start by mixing our dry ingredients. Alright, so for a single recipe, you're going to be doing 2.5 cups of flour, which, Daniel, I'm going to have you put in 5 cups of flour. So make sure you lightly spoon the flour. Do you know about lightly spooning? Okay, perfect. If you're doing a single recipe, do 3 3/4 teaspoons. I feel like just do 3.5 and it'll be just fine. 2 tablespoons and then 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Then the salt varies from brand self-rising flour. Our lighting boy just asked what the advantage of self-rising flour is. I never use self-rising flour. I'm pretty sure the only advantage is that it's just convenient, that you don't have to measure out other stuff. So if you have self-rising flour on hand, just do 2.5 cups of that and skip these steps. I'm going to be doing 2 teaspoons of baking salt, regular salt. 2 teaspoons of salt. If you're doing a single recipe, just do 1 teaspoon. The salt, because it varies by brand with self-rising flour, you can do a range of like 1/2 teaspoon to 1 teaspoon for a single recipe, depending on how salty of a person you are. So that is it for our self-rising flour. So Daniel, I'm just going to have you give that a quick whisk. So it also calls for 1 teaspoon baking soda for the single recipe. I'm going to be doing 2. Okay, and now for the spices. So this recipe has allspice, cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon. It's really best with all these, but I have made it before missing the allspice because we didn't have any and it was still great. So the recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of cloves and nutmeg, and then 1/4 teaspoon of allspice. So we're going to be doing the double. And then I use a full teaspoon for everything because for these spices, it's okay to estimate a little, so I just fill it halfway so I don't get another dish dirty, but that's just completely baker's preference. Alright, so once we've got all these in, that's going to be it for the dry ingredients, and we're going to move on to the wet ingredients. So we're going to combine the sugar, oil, and vanilla here in this bowl. So the recipe calls for 1 cup of oil. I'm using 2. Pour that into the bowl of a stand mixer. If you don't have a stand mixer, nothing needs to be beaten super intensely, so you can just do it by hand. Alright, and then the recipe calls for 2 cups of flour. I'll be doing 4. I mean, not flour. 2 cups of sugar. We already did the flour. 1, 2. If you notice, we were lightly spooning the flour and trying to be really careful with that. With the other stuff, I usually just kind of send it, and a little bit of variation in the sugar amounts is not going to be a big deal. Then we're going to do vanilla. This calls for a lot more vanilla than most cake recipes I've seen, but I always do the full amount. So it's going to be a tablespoon for the single recipe, so 2 full tablespoons for the double. so now we've got the dry ingredients all prepped. We're just going to set that aside, and we're going to take it over to the KitchenAid mixer. So we're going to use the paddle attachment. I'm going to throw that on there. We're going to mix this up just till it's completely mixed. Then we're going to start adding the eggs one at a time. So we've got 8 eggs here. Single recipe uses 4. So you want to fully make sure the previous egg is mixed in before you add the next egg. My grandma always taught me to crack the eggs in a separate bowl before you add them to the batter. So you avoid getting shells, or if you open up a bad egg, then it doesn't ruin the whole recipe. I'm not doing that, but I would highly recommend it. So as you can see, the batter is starting to look pretty light and fluffy. We're going to keep on cracking the rest of these eggs. You don't have to wait too long in between them, just make sure it's all the way mixed. Alright, we've got all 8 eggs in. I'm just going to let that mix up for another minute or 2, and we'll be all done with that. Okay, we're going to leave that in the bowl because we've got a couple other steps to do, and before we mix in the other stuff, we might give it a little beat to get some air back in. Alright, so here we're going to peel some carrots. So I think we've grated 8 pretty big carrots so far for 4 cups. Single recipe, 3 cups. Double recipe, 6 cups. So yeah, I would guess around 6 to 8 large carrots, but it's just going to depend on the size. The recipe doesn't specify about whether it's loosely packed or more firmly packed. I like to have a lot of carrots in the cake, so I pack it down pretty well. One thing I would recommend is starting with this end of the carrots, so then the little piece you're left with at the end is smaller, so you don't waste as much. Although you don't have to waste it, you can always eat it. Alright, while Daniel's working on grating the carrots, I'm going to take you over to the stove, and we're going to work on the walnuts. This is where one of my variations comes into play. The recipe calls for 1 cup of walnuts for a single recipe. I like to do 1.5 cups, or if you really like them, I feel like 2 would even be good. I'm just going to do 1.5 today, or 3 cups for the double. So here I'm chopping the walnuts. I've got halves, so if you have pieces, you don't have to do this step, but I'm just using a big knife and just chopping them up. The great thing about this is you don't have to worry about them being even. You just get various sizes in a piece, which I think is delicious. So actually, before I toast the walnuts, I like to use the pan to brown the butter. We use the brown butter for the icing later on, so it's nice to give it some time to set up in the fridge. 2 sticks butter, and we're going to put it in a large frying pan. The recipe calls for unsalted butter. I always use salted butter, and I think it's great. So we're going to put the pan on about medium heat, and you're going to wait for it to melt. So this part, once it gets melted, you have to watch it pretty carefully because once it starts browning, it goes really fast. We're browning the butter now, so it's all melted. And you can tell it's starting to get pretty hot. It's bubbling and sometimes spurting a little bit. So this butter is going to look like it's not doing anything for a while. You're just stirring around melted butter in a pan. And then all of a sudden, it's going to start to get really foamy. So really watch for that, but at this stage, it's not super important to keep it moving, but it's better to be on the safe side because you don't want to have to throw out all this burnt butter. So I've got this butter melting on medium heat. You can do it lower. It'll just take longer. You can also do it higher. You just got to be really, really careful because it'll go fast. Alright, so this is the part you really have to start watching. for little swirls of brown coming up, because this part on top is not going to get brown. It's just going to be the stuff underneath. So I think it's already starting to happen. You can, yep, there we go. See, if you swirl it fast, you can see the brown starting. So once that brown starts, we're just going to do it for a couple more seconds, and yep, see, all this of a sudden this foam is a lot thicker, kind of creamier. All right, so I'm just going to shut it off and take it off the heat. You should also smell a nutty smell. Do you smell anything? I can't really smell it right now.
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah, that part can be kind of tricky because you don't want to overdo it, but the white foam on top, especially if you're doing a lot of butter, can make it hard to see when it's starting. And see, it's going to look kind of like you overdid it, especially when you transfer it into the bowl. I'll show you. I'll pour it into a different bowl. So there's going to be this dark brown, grainy stuff on the bottom. And as long as mine is definitely kind of on the dark side, but it's not too far done, but it was close. Probably if I had left it on there for a couple more seconds, it would have been burnt. But it does look kind of strange and maybe a little burnt because of the graininess of it. And that's going to all settle to the bottom, but it's perfectly fine. So that'll settle, and you'll just mix that all into the icing. So I'm going to pop this into the fridge. You can also let it cool and solidify on the counter, depending on how much time you have. Alright, and then we're going to use this same pan to toast the walnuts. You don't really need to worry about getting all the butter. So we're going to do it at the same temperature, 5. And we're going to dump in our 1.5 cups or 3 cups of walnuts. Walnuts, it's a little trickier to tell when they're done. But as long as they're not turning black, it's fine. And if you underdo them, it's not a big deal. Because raw walnuts would be just fine in the cake too. The toasting just brings out a little bit of flavor. So walnuts can be omitted in this recipe. If you have nut allergies in your family, we have a nut allergy in our family, so we're just making the cake today really fast before he comes home. And eating it all. The most important part is a lot of the crumbles from chopping it are really fine, and they get kind of stuck on the edges, and those can burn really easily. You can see they're kind of starting to burn a little bit. Alright, we're going to call this good. I don't want to go too far and burn all those little pieces on the bottom. If you didn't chop them up yourself, maybe, or if you're careful not to, I think the little pieces are good because then they mix into the whole cake and add a nice nutty flavor. But if you don't have those, you can maybe go a little longer to get these ones more toasted. And I'm going to transfer these back into the bowl so they don't keep cooking. Yes, you can see some of it's definitely a little burnt. I might just leave some of this stuff in the pan and throw it out. We've got the 6 cups of carrots. We've got the toasted walnuts, dry ingredients, the wet ingredients, and then our last step is canned pineapple. The recipe calls for crushed pineapple, which I have. In the past, when I haven't had crushed pineapple, I've just done it up in the blender beforehand. The recipe calls for ½ a cup for a single recipe, but I like to do a little more. I started doing that when my friend thought there was 8 ounces in a cup and dumped the whole can in, and it was really good. So I'm going to do a cup and a half today. So for the single recipe, that would be 3/4 of a cup. It just adds moisture and sweetness to the cake. It won't add any kind of pineapple flavor at all. So even if you're not partial to pineapple, I'd recommend using that. Yes. The recipe does say it's optional, but highly recommended. I've never done it without. Alright, so we've got a cup and a half here. Another thing that's important is you want to make sure you're getting pineapple that's in 100% juice. Especially make sure it's pineapple juice too, not like apple juice or something. We're going to come back over here to the KitchenAid. We're going to whisk this back up since it's been a bit. Get some air into it. Then we're going to turn it down to the lowest speed and add in the flour. We want to do this slowly to make sure it doesn't poof. right, and that's all nicely mixed in. So this part, you don't want to overmix it. So you want to keep it on low, not turn it up to high like I just did. And once it's all mixed in, stop. The rest of this, we're going to do by hand. Oh, at this point, if you haven't already, preheat the oven to 350. I should have done that probably before toasting the walnuts. So we are going to add the rest of the ingredients, the pineapple, carrots. So for this part, you're just going to fold it in. And you don't want to overmix the batter. Not exactly positive, but I believe that's because we've got some air in the batter from when we beat the eggs in. And we don't want all of that to leave. Okay, I'm going to add the walnuts now. So at this point, if you are doing a double recipe, do up to the flour step in the double mixer, and then I think it probably would have been easier if I transferred to another bowl. Okay, so this is all mixed up, and we are all done with the cake batter. So we are going to start by filling up the triple layer cake pans because these are going to take longer. So we're going to want to get these in the oven first. Alright, so I'm just going to pour it. It might be a little messy. Alright, so those look good. Started preheating the oven late, so it's not quite ready. We'll pop those in the oven in just a few minutes. So when you're doing cupcakes, you want to fill them about 2/3 of the way. You don't want it quite to the top. If you fill them too much, then they can collapse. Alright, so the oven is preheated now. We are going to pop them in the oven. Oh, I got to readjust the racks a little bit. I'm going to set the timer for 30 minutes. The recipe calls for 35 to 40 minutes. I like to start on the low end so we don't overcook it. We're going to actually put the cupcakes in at the same time as the cake, which is a little bad, but we're going to try it. So the cupcakes take 15 to 20 minutes. I'm going to check them after 10 just to see how they're doing. If you're putting this many things in the oven, which you really shouldn't do, you should put it on convection. Oh, but look, these are going to be cute. And we have like a little swirl of cream cheese frosting on it. Alright, so it has been 30 minutes on our cake. The cupcakes are already out, don't look at them, they're ugly. So in order to test if these are done, you're just going to stick a knife into the middle. And it looks like it came out pretty clean. It can be a little hard to tell with this cake because bits of the, yeah, see this one's definitely not done. That one is potentially done. I'll test it again. So yeah, that back one came out clean. So it's okay if little bits of the cake stick to it, you just don't want any batter. So, alright, we for sure know this back one's done. So we're going to take that out. And you do the same thing with the cupcakes. I use a knife because I don't have toothpicks. If you want to make a less intrusive hole, use a toothpick. Alright, so now the cakes are cooling in the oven and we're going to start on the cream cheese frosting. So in here I've got 4 8-ounce packages of cream cheese. If you're just doing the single recipe, 2 8-ounce packages of cream cheese. And then here I've got the butter that we browned earlier. It's been chilling in the fridge. It's not quite hardened all the way. It's still soft in the middle, which is perfect. And then Daniel is going to be adding 2 teaspoons of vanilla. 1 if you're doing the single recipe. Alright, and then the recipe calls for a pinch of salt, which I'm going to do probably about this much salt, but I'm also using salted butter. So, actually I'm going to do a little less than that. This is the salted butter. And then, yeah, that's for 2 recipes. Okay, and then this bag is a lucky amount. It has 7 cups of powdered sugar. For a single recipe, 3.5 cups. If you want a little bit of a stiffer frosting, you can go up to 4 cups. So if you're wanting to pipe with it at all, which kind of works, do a little bit more powdered sugar to make it stiffer. Alright, so we're going to start by mixing this really slowly because we don't want it to poof. And I'm actually going to put my hands here as well. And turn it on and off because there's a lot of powdered sugar in this bowl. If you're just doing the single recipe, you might not have to do this as much. There we go. So we're just going to whip this for a while. You can't really overdo it. Off, pop the bowl down, and scrape the sides. Alright, so that is looking pretty good. If you want to make it a little fluffier, you can leave it for a bit longer. Yeah, I'm going to call that good. One more suggestion that I forgot to mention and also kind of forgot to do this time is in the past, sometimes I toast extra walnuts and then crunch them up really fine after toasting and just mix them in with the icing if you want it to be a little bit nuttier, which I forgot to do this time. Alright, now I'm just going to pop that in the fridge for a little bit until the cakes are done cooling, and we'll be back to ice in a couple hours. Alright, we are back. The cake has been cooling for a couple hours now, and so it's time to ice it. And we're also going to ice the ugly cupcakes and the cute cupcakes. And Daniel's learning how to ice a cake. Have you ever iced a cake?
Yeah.
Oh. Wow. So we're going to take the first layer. Hello! Alright, so you're going to take the first layer of the cake and carefully put it onto a cake stand or a platter. And then put a dollop of icing on. Daniel, give us a dollop. Pretty big dollop, because if it's too big, it'll just use out the sides, and you can use it on the sides. Okay. More than that.
This much extra?
Yeah, should be good.
I'm interrupting your video.
Alright, yes.
As
okay.
I have many times.
So you're going to spread this part around, but you don't have to do a very good job because you're going to stack a layer on top of it. Alright, and then you're going to take the next layer. This part is pretty tricky. It's cracking, it's cracking.
Nice.
Alright.
Expertly done.
So I like to use the layer that I think looks the best for the top. I'm just going to flip this one. So once we've got all of the spots covered, all the cake covered, we can use the hot knife to start smoothing out the frosting and making it look lovely. Alright, so for the baby cupcakes here, we got a star-shaped tip and 2 bags because these are off-brand bags and will pop really easily. So we're going to start in the center. Spiral out, trying to get all the way, well, I guess it doesn't have to be all the way to the edges. And a nice little tip at the top. There's our little baby cupcake. We are here with the rest of our carrot cake. How do you think it turned out?
Delicious. Really moist and good.
Yeah, very moist. I think the extra pineapple makes it a little extra moist, which I like.
We're using the word moist too much. But yeah, it's especially delicious with whole milk or any sort of milk.
Do you have a recommended brand?
No.
No.
The good stuff.
Douglas, I told you you weren't allowed to talk.
What were we gonna say
Well, I
about
can
double
shut this
recipe?
off right now. Double recipe.
Oh, convection.
Yeah, so if you're going to make a double recipe, especially if you're doing cupcakes and cake, I would recommend doing the cupcakes first. The batter will be fine sitting for the 15 minutes it takes, because that's why our cupcakes fell and didn't work out that great, I think, because there were just too many things in the oven. And make sure you set the oven on convection right away, which I forgot to do. But other than that, a double recipe worked out. And it all fit
It was
in
all
a big
delicious still.
KitchenAid
It
mixer.
just didn't-
Yeah,
yeah.
just didn't look beautiful. But.
Well, thanks for watching, and let us know how it worked for you.
Ah.